In today's video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on Laowa's new GF mount 19mm f2.80D. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll be giving you my thoughts on the new Laowa 19mm f2.80D for the Fujifilm GFX system. Now it's an ultra wide angle prime with a fast aperture and next to no lens distortion, so really what is there not to like? But before we do get into the lens itself, I do want to say that Laowa did send this to me for testing purposes and for the review. I don't get to keep it, I have to send it back. In fact, I'll be sending it back right after this review. Now I don't get paid for this. Laowa didn't ask me to say anything specific, and all the opinions in this video are my own. So let's get on with it. Now, I've had the lens for a little over a month now, and I've been able to shoot with it in quite a few different situations, so do stick around to the end of the video for a slideshow rather, of sample images from this lens and the GFX 100S. But before we get into looking at some images though, let's run through a few points about build quality, handling, and of course image quality. As we expect from Laowa, this is a very, very well-made lens, and it looks and feels a lot like sort of a souped-up version of their 9mm f2.8 for the APS-C systems, but with all of, I guess, the things that Laowa has learned about making a lens that feels really great in the hand over the years. Now, unlike the 17mm f4, which was an existing full-frame lens design that had the focal expander built into it to make a GFX lens, this has actually been built from the ground up to be a lens that is designed for the larger sensor of the GFX system. While I don't have the 17mm on hand to compare them directly in terms of image quality, this is a much smaller, much more compact, much lighter lens design, and it also has the clicked aperturing, which was missing from the 17mm. Now, the one thing that Laowa did mention when they sent it over was that I should definitely check out the size and weight of this lens. And for a wide-angle lens, especially with a maximum aperture of f2.8 and on medium format, this lens is absolutely tiny, and its quoted weight is only 564 grams. So that's only 60 grams heavier than the little 63mm f2.8 that Fujifilm makes. So that makes it a really easy lens to carry around and to work with. Now, I've actually been taking it out in my waist pack while I've been out cycling around the city and out to the countryside, and I've barely noticed the combination of the GFX 100S and this 19mm when compared to what I normally carry, which is, sort of an X camera and a couple of primes. The only potential downside to the construction that I've noticed is that the aperturing is a little bit loose. The stops are definite, but it's very easy to sort of knock them out of place. And so, I've pulled it out of my bag a couple of times and it's sort of been halfway between one stop or another, whereas it was definitely on a particular stop when I put it in my bag. So, not really a deal breaker, but just something that I noticed while I was using it. Like most fast aperture wide-angle lenses, the 19mm doesn't perform at its best wide open. Now, in terms of sharpness, at f2.8 the center of the frame is good, but not great, and the corners suffer quite a bit. From f4 the center gets much better, and the corners become very usable from f5.6. Now, in my testing, I found that peak sharpness tends to occur all the way across the frame between about f8 and f11, and then sharpness starts to drop off again from f16 and f22 as the diffraction starts to kick in. Now that's pretty standard stuff. So I found myself hovering around the f8 to f16 mark to get the best image quality and the most depth of field for the way that I've been working with the lens. Now, one thing I will say is that I feel like a lens this wide doesn't really need to have a maximum aperture of f2.8, and starting the lens at say f4, even f5.6, might have resulted in sort of a better quality lens throughout the entire range, but also an even smaller and lighter package than we already get. But, f4 doesn't look quite as sexy on the marketing materials though, and perhaps Laowa are also thinking they don't really want to cannibalize their existing 17mm f4, and that 2mm difference may not have been enough to make you go, oh, I'd rather this f4 lens over this one. From f2.8 to f4, this lens does display quite a deep, dark vignette, as we see with a lot of Laowa's lenses, but that improves quite a bit by f5.6, and it's almost gone by f8 and f11. Now, with a lens like this, you're often going to be stopping down to f8 and f11 to make most of your images anyway, so you'll probably, very rarely notice it in day-to-day use. Another thing about this design is that the lens can focus quite close. It has a minimum focus distance of about 18 centimeters, so if you enjoy, getting in close with a wide-angle field of view, this is definitely a great option for doing that. Now, while the bokeh is, fine for a wide-angle lens, the sharpness when used wide open doesn't make for great close-up images. So stopping down is definitely the way to go if you want to make use of, all those juicy megapixels that you can get from the GFX bodies. As with many of Laowa's wide-angle lenses, we do find that circular ghost pattern appearing when we point the lens directly at a light source. Now, interestingly, with this lens, the flare is sort of a desaturated rainbow rather than that blazing red ring we saw in lenses like the 9mm f2.8. Now, I'm sure someone who knows a little more about lens designs and coatings and things could probably tell us why that is, but nonetheless, it is there. In terms of flare, I did notice a little bit when light hits the lenses at extreme angles, but nothing too serious and nothing that sort of raising your hand to shade the lens won't fix. Again, fairly standard stuff for a wide-angle lens like this. Bright light sources can also produce a little bit of ghosting across the frame, but again, nothing too significant. Now, in the corners particularly, we start to see some ghosts around light sources, but aside from that, I haven't noticed any significant ghosting during my use of this lens. In terms of chromatic aberration, from f2.8 to f4, you do see a little bit of it. And I noticed that light does tend to bleed around high contrast edges quite a bit, as you can see in this sample. Sunstars begin to appear from f4, and they form into these beautiful big 10-point stars by f8. So for those who enjoy that effect, this lens does not disappoint. The only downside that I can see to this is sometimes those stars do get broken up by the ghosting that I mentioned just before. All in all, this is another high quality and fun to use lens from Laowa. Now, it's not quite the Fujifilm GF lens quality in terms of, sharpness from corner to corner, micro contrast, autofocus, weather sealing, all the bells and whistles, but it's also not priced that way. The retail price of this lens is $999, so it's a great way to get into sort of that ultra wide angle field of view on the GFX without breaking the bank. And this is, incidentally, exactly the same price as Laowa's 17mm f4 lens, but the 19mm would be the lens for my money because it's just so much smaller, so much easier to carry around, so much lighter. And if you don't really need those extra 2mm, then this is definitely a great option. And I haven't had anything this wide on my GFX for a long time, not since I last used Laowa's 17mm, so I'll say that I had an absolute blast working with it, and I would recommend this as a great budget-friendly wide-angle option for the GFX. So if you are interested in picking up a copy, I would really appreciate it if you could use the link below. It does send a small kickback to me with no cost to you, and I would really, really appreciate it as it helps me keep making these videos. But as always, I hope that this has been a useful look at this lens for you, and do let me know in the comments if you have any questions regarding this lens. I don't have the 17mm on hand, so I won't be able to do any direct comparisons, but if I can, I'll try to help out as best as possible. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.